So we're doing a series, it's just to round off we've had a year-long series of talks on stories, symbols and myths. And we've just been rounding off that series with a collection of talks really about the Buddha and about different qualities of the Buddha. And the symbols of the hand gestures or the different mudras or hand gestures that relate to these different qualities of the Buddha. So, yeah, last week, Matti gave a talk last week, and Matti talked about the particular quality of enlightenment or the enlightened mind of connecting and friendship, and the emphasis that the Buddha placed on spiritual friendship as being, well, the most important thing in the spiritual life. Spiritual friendship, he said, was the whole of the spiritual life. And we heard how he spoke to one of his followers called Bahiya and said, actually, if spiritual friendship is in place, that's the most important condition, and everything else, all the other conditions will fall out of that. So we heard last week how spiritual friendship was emphasised by the Buddha, and Matti talked about the quality of connection and awakening or liberation from connecting with other people. So this talk follows on from last week's talk. Again, looking at the theme of connecting with other people, but focusing on the quality of empathy, the Buddha's ability to empathise with basically what anybody he encountered with. This tremendous ability he had just to connect with anybody he encountered, and what came out of that. So, yeah, the Buddha was an extraordinary communicator. I mean, he was lots of different things, as we've seen over the last few weeks, and we will see over the next few weeks. But the quality that really stands out for me, was my favourite quality of the Buddha is just his ability as a communicator. So, for me, there's two qualities that really define this aspect of the Buddha, which I want to draw out this evening. And the first one is that the Buddha's ability just to see very, very clearly each person. He could just see, in a way, the unique qualities, unique attributes, the unique conditioning of everybody, each person that he encountered. And it wasn't that he had to kind of work it all out and kind of suss them out. He just seemed to intuitively just be able to kind of know and meet the person he was encountering. And the second strand is the Buddha's deep concern for other beings, the Buddha's deep concern for the people he encountered. What he wanted to do was to ripen them, you could say. He wanted to help them to grow, to develop, to awaken. So he had these two qualities. He could really see the people he encountered, and he really wanted to nurture them. He really had a deep concern for their well-being. And the Buddha used a word to describe how this felt for him, how he experienced this. He used the word anukampa, which I've written up there. And so the word anukampa means to tremble with. And the Buddha described this experience of connecting with people as though he said it was like he trembled with compassion for other beings. When he encountered another being, he trembled with compassion. He used this word anukampa, to tremble with. That's the kind of literal translation to means to tremble with. But for me, it's along the lines of, well, he resonated with other people, quite literally, something within him resonated. So it's true of the Buddha, well, he definitely dwelt on a different plane, you could say, of reality. His mind, he dwelt on a different level, a different plane, a different dimension. But he also had this amazing ability to occupy exactly the same place as whoever he met. So he's almost like in two spaces at once. He was in this completely different realm where he could see very, very clearly what was going on in a situation. But he was also able just to meet a person and occupy the same space that they were in, just to meet them in their own space, on their own terms. So this made him an extraordinary communicator. He knew what they needed. He could just sense what the person needed, where they were at. And this gave him this ability to just know what to say to whoever he met, to know how to say it and what to say. So I'd like to just illustrate that with a few stories, really, just kind of draw out some examples of some of the different people that the Buddha encountered, and this kind of amazing ability just to know what to say and how to say it. So the first of the stories is an encounter with a man called Bahiya. Sometimes it was called Bahiya of the bark garment. He may have worn a garment out. Well, it sounds like he wore a garment made out of bark, but it's not really mentioned. It's just his name. They just say Bahiya of the bark garment. They don't describe what he was wearing. But let's assume he was wearing something made out of bark. Anyway, it's not really relevant to the story. Let's just call him Bahiya. So Bahiya, he was a very dedicated practitioner, not a Buddhist, but not a follower of the Buddha at the time. He was just a spiritual wanderer, a spiritual practitioner, very, very dedicated and had been for a very, very long time. Very kind of wholehearted, sincere practitioner. And one day the thought occurred to Bahiya, I wonder if I'm enlightened. I might well be an enlightened being. And it said that when the thought occurred to Bahiya that he might be an enlightened being, that a deva, a heavenly being, appeared to Bahiya and said, I'm sorry Bahiya, you're not an enlightened being, but not only are you not an enlightened being, you're not even anywhere near being enlightened. Nothing you're actually doing is getting you anywhere near to being enlightened. So it wasn't good news. But he resolved. He didn't become kind of downcast or dejected. He just the next thought arose to him. Well, is there anybody who is enlightened? Is there somebody else who is enlightened? And the Deva said yes. There's the Buddha. There's a man called Gautama the Buddha, and he is currently residing in the far north of India, and Bahiya was somewhere south of that, maybe in the middle of India. So Bahiya just resolved straight away, he must go and see this man, he must go and see the Buddha. If there was an enlightened being, he must go and meet him. So he had this real, tremendous sense of urgency, and he abandoned what he was doing and just set out on foot to the north of India to try and find the Buddha. And the story said he was so keen, he had such a sense of urgency, that some stories say he didn't stop for one night, and some stories say he didn't stop for any longer than one night in each place. He just was basically relentless. He just wanted to find the Buddha, and he just went on foot until he found the Buddha. And he arrived in a town called Shravasti, which is where the Buddha was staying at the time. And he asked around, where's the Buddha? Where's this guy called the Buddha? And he was told, well, the Buddha is out collecting his food. He's begging around the houses, and he doesn't speak to people whilst he's collecting his food. So if you just rest, you've been walking a long time, just relax, chill out for a few hours. The Buddha will be back. And but Bahiya didn't want to wait. He'd walked for many days to get to the Buddha. He didn't want to wait any longer. So he just went. He went to try and find the Buddha in his arms around and ask him for a teaching. He wanted to know what he could do. He wanted to know a teaching. And so he did, it was said he just recognised the Buddha. He'd never seen the Buddha before, but there was something in Bahiya. Bahiya seems to be quite a person as well. Something in Bahiya resonated with the Buddha, and he knew straight away when he'd found the Buddha. And he called out to the Buddha, give me a teaching. And the Buddha refused. The Buddha said, well, actually, I'm doing my arms round. I don't give teachings during the arms round, but if you wait a little while, I can give you a teaching then. And Bahiya asked again and said, Buddha, give me a teaching. Oh, I know, I've come all this way, give me a teaching. And again the Buddha said, it's not the right time, Bahiya. I'm doing the arms round. If you wait a little while, I can give you a teaching then. But then Bahiya, well, traditionally, if you ask the Buddha something 3 times, he'll answer you. So I don't know if Bahiya knew this or not, but he asked the 3rd time, and he said to the Buddha, basically, there's no time to waste. We don't know when one of us is going to die. One of us could die at any moment. Give me a teaching. I need to have a teaching. And so the Buddha stopped what he was doing. He stopped his arm around. And I'm just going to get the book. Well, I've got a book with some. This is a book. Just pause the story to give you a plug. Encounters with Enlightenment. And the stories are all from Encounters with Enlightenment. But I want to read you exactly what the Buddha said to Bahiya. So the Buddha stopped what he was doing. He turned to Bahiya and said this to him. He said, he looked at Bahiya and said, Bahiya, in the seen, only the seen. In the heard, only the heard. In the sensed, only the sensed. In the known, only the known. This is the way you must train yourself, Bahiya. When in the seen there is only the seen. In the heard, only the heard. In the sensed, only the sensed. in the known, only the known, then any you, Bahiya, will not be found, either inside or outside of the experience. Here lies the end of suffering. So he stopped what he was doing, just turned directly at Bahiya and said these few lines. And something remarkable happened, because Bahiya became enlightened, he became awakened on the spot. Basically, those few words were enough to completely transform Bahiya's heart and mind, his whole being. He became completely transformed. So I don't know if that's happened now to anyone else. Maybe somebody has become enlightened from those verses. But basically there's a real sense of urgency. Bahiya, he wanted to know the truth, and he said, we don't know, we don't know when either one of us is going to die. He had a real sense of impermanence, a real sense of urgency. And the Buddha met it. The Buddha met this urgency and just said, bang, these verses, in the seen, only the seen, in the heard, only the heard. This is how you must train yourself. And that was enough for Bahiya to become enlightened. The story ends actually, it's quite a sad end to the story. Bahiya gets run over by a cow, unfortunately. It's quite a sad ending. He becomes fully enlightened and then is run over by a cow. Quite a bizarre end to the story, but it kind of it shows how, in a sense, he was right to have that sense of urgency. He had a real sense of impermanence. Actually, I've thought of a joke from Bodhinaga, which I'm going to throw in. Because we talked about our ability to distinguish what we're seeing and make out what we're seeing. And maybe if Bahiya had done that instead of just seeing the seen and the heard, he might have seen the cow coming towards him. Which I think is a good point.
There's this brown and white thing.
There's a brown and white thing coming towards me. So Bahiya unfortunately died, but he died a fully awakened being. And he had this real sense of urgency. He didn't know when he was going to die, and he didn't know when the Buddha was going to die. So he had a real sense of impermanence. He was really ripe for a teaching, and the Buddha knew that. The Buddha sensed that and just gave him the right teaching to awaken. So, that's a particular way that the Buddha taught occasionally when the person was ready for that or ripe for that. He gave them the teaching that would, lead to their awakening. There's a second story about a different character. It's a very different situation. A lady called Kisagotami. And Kisagotami was she was an Indian lady. I think probably of a fairly low caste. I mean, life wasn't very good for Indian women anyway. And what she really wanted was to have a son. Because if you bore a son in Indian society as a woman, that made you suddenly much more important, because sons were considered very important, and it wasn't a good time. It wasn't a good time to be a woman, a good society for women. So Kisagotami really wanted to have a son, so that she had the sense this would make my life much better. If this is what I really need, is to give birth to a son, and everybody would respect me. I'd be much more valued and much higher position in my household. And she did. She gave birth to a son who she completely cherished, completely adored, and her life got much better. She was respected. She was valued. And she thought, this is it, my life is completely made. So she really doted and adored her son. But again, there's another kind of tragic twist to this story, because what happened was Kisagotami's son died. Kisagotami's son died. I can't remember the details of how he died, but basically Kisagotami's son died. And she was absolutely grief-stricken. She was devastated by this, as you could imagine. A terrible thing to happen to a mother of a young child, but particularly in her circumstances where, for her social position and standing depended on her being a mother of this child. So she was absolutely devastated and overcome with grief, and she refused to accept that the child was dead. She just refused to accept it. So she carried around her dead son with her and asked a whole series of people, "Will you help me? Will you help me get medicine for my son?" And time and again people would say to her, "Well, your son's dead." But she just couldn't hear it. She wasn't in a state to hear that her son was dead. She just wanted medicine. She wanted something to get her out of this situation. So she asked a whole series of people, and nobody could help her. But somebody said to her, "There's the Buddha. The Buddha is staying nearby. maybe he could give you medicine for your son, maybe he could help you. So Kisagotami went along, took her dead son to meet the Buddha, and said, to the Buddha, please help me, help me save my child, give me some medicine for my child. And it's very interesting because the Buddha obviously could see that the child was dead, he could see that the son was dead, and but he didn't just come out and say, look, your son's dead, what are you doing, your son's dead. He didn't say that, he didn't do that. What he did instead was he said to Kisagotami, well, I can help you, I can get you medicine, but first of all you need to get a mustard seed. Go and find me from the village a mustard seed. And Kisagotami said, well, brilliant, yeah, I can find you a mustard seed, that's no problem, I can do that, that's straightforward, everyone's got mustard seed. But as she was going, the Buddha said, well, this mustard seed needs to be from a house where nobody has died. And so Kisagotami was, yeah, fine, no problem, I'll get a mustard seed, I'll get the medicine, fantastic. So she went off and she knocked on the first door and said, can you give me a mustard seed? And the person answered, yeah, of course, I can get you a mustard seed. And she said, oh, well, has anybody died in this house? And the person said, well, yeah, somebody died just 2 months ago. My auntie died. So Kisagotami, left that house. I'm very sorry to say, left that house, knocked on the next door. Can you get me a mustard seed? Yes, no problem. Has anybody died in this house? Well, yes. About 6 months ago, we lost our son. So again, Kisagotami was disappointed she couldn't get the mustard seed. But as she knocked on door after door, she got the same reply, she got the same response. Every door she knocked on, somebody had died from that household. It might have been a mother or a father or a son or a daughter. Somebody had died in every household. And as she went on more and more doors, suddenly the penny dropped. Suddenly something shifted for Kisagotami and she realised, my son's dead. And everybody dies, and everybody's loved ones, they all die. So suddenly this realisation dawned on her, and she returned to the Buddha, and she no longer wanted medicine for a sick son, but instead she wanted to become a follower of the Buddha. She wanted to become a disciple of the Buddha, because she'd realised the truth of things. She'd realised impermanence. She'd realised, she realised that her son was dead, and nothing could bring him back. So basically she became a disciple, a follower of the Buddha, and she became enlightened. She became an enlightened disciple of the Buddha in time. So very different. Two tragic stories in different ways, but also to illustrate two very different ways of the Buddha communicating with people. In the first story, he gave a very pithy, direct teaching to Bahiya, but that was completely inappropriate with Kisagotami. There's no way she could hear what the Buddha had to say or his message, and he used just a very kind of compassionate and very different way to try and get a message, to try and get Kisagotami to see for herself the truth of death and impermanence. So a couple of very kind of different stories to illustrate that. And this next story is a story about a disciple of the Buddha called Sona. So when this story takes place, Sona was already a follower of the Buddha, he was a disciple. And Sona, a bit about Sona's background, he was a lute player, so that was his trade, that was his profession. He was a musician, he was a lute player. Apparently with hairy feet, hairy soles of his feet. Again, you get these kind of odd details. He had hairy, the soles of his feet were hairy. I don't know what that significance of that is. There's some significance to part of the story, but anyway, he became a lute player in the court of the king, and then eventually became a disciple of the Buddha. He became transfixed. He went to the village to hear teachings of the Buddha, became transfixed by the Buddha's teachings, and became a disciple of the Buddha. But he was from quite a privileged background, quite a wealthy background, and maybe the kind of smooth, soft, hairy feet kind of allude to the fact that he didn't really have to. He didn't have a very rough life. He had quite an easy life. But he joined the kind of fellowship of the Buddha's disciples. He joined the community of the Buddha's disciples, and he was really discerning. A bit like Bahiya, he had a real sense of urgency. He was really striving for awakening, really striving to make progress. He was really driven. And the story goes that one day he was just pacing backwards and forwards down the side of a river, just really kind of trying to well, doing a bit of reflection. I don't know if people went to Ratnaguna's Day on Reflection on Saturday, but Sona was doing his own bit of reflection, but he just really pacing upwards, backwards, down the side of a bank, really kind of trying to nut it out, really striving to understand the Buddha's teaching. And some of the other followers of the Buddha noticed that Sona's feet were bleeding, and he hadn't realised. He was so intent and so driven to try and break through to the truth, he hadn't noticed that his feet were bleeding. So they were concerned for Sona and kind of the way he was going about it. So they went and told the Buddha, and the Buddha called for Sona and asked him to come over and said, Sona, when you were pacing up and down, were you thinking of giving up the spiritual life and basically doing something easier, something that way you could make progress faster and just have an easier life again? And Sona was surprised. Well, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Actually, I was thinking, I'm really making all this effort, I'm really trying my hardest, and I'm not getting anywhere. I'm thinking of packing it all in, I'm thinking of giving it up. And the Buddha, the Buddha had a message for Sona, and the message that the Buddha wanted to say to him was basically just to relax a bit, not to try so hard, not to kind of push yourself, because it's not going to work. It's not working for me. You just need to pull back. You need to relax a bit, not try so hard. But again, he didn't just say that to Sona. He didn't say, well, just relax, Sona. Just chill out, relax a bit. He didn't say that. He knew how he could get the point across and how he could make that point. And he knew that Sona used to be a lute player, a musician. So he said to Sona, well, Sona, I hear that you used to be a lute player. Is that right? And Sona said, yes, Lord. I used to be a musician. I used to be a lute player. And Buddha said, okay, well, when you were playing your lute, if you tune the strings really, really, really tightly, did it make a beautiful sound? And Sona said, no, Lord, it didn't. It didn't make a beautiful sound. It was kind of like just a really kind of, not a very pleasant sound. And so the Buddha said, okay, well, if you really loosen the strings very, very slack, did your lute make a beautiful sound? And Sona said, no, Lord, it didn't. It was just a kind of really kind of dull thud. And so the Buddha said, okay, so Sona, your mind is like this, the spiritual life is like this. If you make the wrong kind of effort, if you try and push yourself really hard, that's like having the strings of your mind or the strings of your life tightened too tight, and your mind's going to get agitated and restless. But if you slacken off the strings of the lute, well, that's like making not enough effort and just kind of slackening off, and you'll become dull. Your mind will become dull. But if you make just the right kind of effort and a balanced effort, then your mind will be beautifully tuned and your spiritual life will be balanced, and you'll make very quick progress. And I can't remember what happens at the end of the story. I imagine Sona becomes enlightened, but he does a lot better after that. He doesn't give up on their spiritual life, and he does make much better progress. But again, it's just an example of the Buddha knowing, well, not just to say, just relax, Sona, stop trying so hard, but he's able to illustrate that point with an example from Sona's life and his background. So Sona's much more emotionally engaged with what the Buddha's got to say. The Buddha was able to do this. He was able to draw metaphors from people's lives and use examples, things they were familiar with, so that they could really understand this teaching. So it wasn't just going over their head or just kind of going in one ear and out the other. It would really sink in, it would really hit home. So he seemed to know how to do this, how to find examples in people's life, their everyday life, and relate Dharma to that. And the last example is, again, from Sadhaloka's book, Encounters with Enlightenment, which I really recommend. And it's about a ploughman called, I think, Bharadvaja. That's Bharadvaja. And he was a farmer and a ploughman. And the Buddha, again, had been collecting food nearby Bharadvaja's land, the ploughman's land. And he went to the farm and asked for some money. He said, please, son, off some money for some food. Please, could I have some food? And Bharadvaja was a kind of quite a... I'm not going to call him tight-fisted. Let's not call him tight-fisted. But he was a good businessman, and he wasn't going to give away a meal for free. So he said, well, basically, I've got work to do here. If you put in a good day's work, then I'm a ploughman. I've got work to do. I've got fields. I sow crops. I need them cultivated. If you do a day's work, I'll give you some food. And the Buddha replied to Bharadvaja, I'm also a ploughman. I also sow seeds. And when I've ploughed and sown, I eat. And Bharadvaja, he quite liked a bit of banter and a bit of an exchange. So he said, well, I don't see your ox, I don't see your plough. What kind of a farmer are you? What kind of seed and wheat are you sowing and eating? And the Buddha replied to Bharadvaja, faith is the seed that I sow, and self-control is my rein. Wisdom is my yoke and plough. Conscience and ethics are my guiding pole. My mind is the rope that I hold. Mindfulness is my goad. And it's a bit more, but he goes on to say, energy is my oxen that carries me to perfect liberation without ever looking back. This is the ploughing that I do, and it has the deathless as its fruit. Whoever ploughs like this will be freed from suffering. And basically the story goes on a little bit further, but Bharadvaja becomes a disciple of the Buddha. He actually turns from becoming a businessman, quite a tight-fisted businessman, to becoming a disciple of the Buddha. And again, it's the Buddha was able to, just to speak in Bharadvaja's language, in his terms. He could take the everyday, the surroundings he was in, the plough, the ox, the field, the reins, and turn them. He could turn them into metaphors for the Dharma and to illustrate his teaching in a way. So he was able to enter the space, the world, and use the language and the terms of whoever he met. He seemed to know just what to say and how to say it. So they're just a few of many examples of the encounters with the Buddha and how he was able to teach people in different ways. So you've got the very urgent, pithy teaching to Bahiya. You've got the quite compassionate way of getting a message across to Kisagotami. You've got the example of using Sona's background and a musical background to illustrate, what could have been quite a difficult point to explain about balanced effort. And then you've got being able to convert a tight-fisted businessman, a farmer, by using metaphors from his language. So the Buddha was able to do this. He was able to enter the world, the mind, the level, the kind of the sphere, the realm that the people were occupying. And he would know intuitively what to say to them and how to say it, what emotional tone to use, when to say it, how to say it. I don't know how he did it. I find that extraordinary. And there's another aspect of this. Well, for me, it illustrates the Buddha's empathy, his ability to resonate with people and connect with them. But there's another aspect of his communication as well that I'm really inspired by, because at the time, it was only a particular kind of caste, kind of level of society that were able to be taught, the Brahminical caste. They were the people who were allowed to be educated, and they were the people who were allowed to be taught. And everybody else wasn't allowed to be taught the spiritual life and to practice the spiritual life. But the Buddha he made his teachings accessible to everybody, to everyday people. So he would have taught, he taught Brahmins, and he converted Brahmins to be his disciples. He taught people of the lowest caste, he taught kings, he taught courtesans, he basically from people from any walk of life. It didn't matter what walk of life people came from. And he made his teachings available in a form that was very accessible to anybody, no matter what their background. And he talked in a language that people would understand. So when he was talking to farmers, he used the language of farmers. And he used another farming analogy. So when he was trying to explain to somebody the way our mind flows like a process, a continuous stream of mental events that we can direct in a skillful way. He used the example of irrigation and said to farmers, well, it's like irrigating your mind. You're drawing off that stream of mental events towards a more fruitful direction. When he was trying to explain to everyday people how our minds are shaped by habits, he said, well, it's like a potter's wheel, like the potter's wheel that's going round and round, and it becomes shaped by the wheel and the hand. Our mind becomes shaped by our habits. And when he wanted to get across the message that it's important that our mind can do exactly what we want it to, that we can follow through in our intentions, we can we can commit to something and stick at it. He said, well, that's like training our mind in the same way that a fletcher will make an arrow that will go straight to the target. It's like creating a mind that will go straight to the point. So he used metaphors and language and examples that would be accessible to anybody, to everybody. It wasn't a way of teaching that was removed and remote and inaccessible. So basically, this is a quality that I just find very inspiring with the Buddha's, how was he able to do that, and to intuitively know how to speak to people. And they had this ability to resonate and connect with people and make the message available to them in a form that would be useful to them. So basically, for the rest of the talk, I want to we'll just explore how that might have been possible. How might the Buddha have been able to do this? How might we, as in our own way, try and cultivate some of this empathy, some of this ability to just to really be able to intuitively connect with people, to resonate with them. And what is it that gets in the way? What is it in our own life, in our own mind, that gets in the way, that stops us from being able to operate in this way like the Buddha was able to? There's some pictures with Daniel. There's a picture of the Buddha I forgot to have. This is try again. Like this, I think. Oh, the other way, the right. Yeah. So this is, I forgot to have a picture of the Buddha whilst I was telling the stories of the Buddha. So that's the picture of the Buddha. So if we go on to the next one. So this is a meditation mudra called the Dhyana mudra. And when Satyajyoti introduced this series of talks, she talked about how the different qualities of the Buddha related to different hand gestures, to the different symbols. And so she talked about the gesture of fearlessness, which we're going to hear about next week. We've also had the gesture of kind of reverence and respect. There's the gesture of generosity. And there's the teaching mudra, the gesture of teaching. So if you go back to the previous one. This is the gesture of Dhyana mudra. And basically what I want to draw a little bit about how for me this mudra connects with the quality of empathy. Because I think there's two qualities, there's two strands to the Buddha, which for me are really crucial in his ability to connect in this way. And they're wisdom and compassion, the Buddha's wisdom and the Buddha's compassion. And I like to relate to this mudra in that way. There's two things coming together to make a whole. There's two aspects. There's the Buddha's wisdom and the Buddha's compassion, and they come together in a phrase which is called shunyata. So that's the Dhyana mudra, and very, very small writing, sorry for people at the back, there's the word shunyata. And shunyata is sometimes translated as voidness or emptiness. It's also translated as fullness. I'll talk about that. It's translated as both emptiness and fullness. Sometimes called voidness, the deathless or the mystery. But it's a state where, I'll try and draw out with the rest of the talk, draw out what this state is. But it's a state that the Buddha occupies. It's a state which you just translate sometimes as the mystery, because in a way there isn't a direct translation. But it's called both emptiness, voidness, and fullness. And for me, there's two aspects of it. There's two aspects which hopefully will explain it. And one is the Buddha's wisdom and the Buddha's compassion. And for me, they're expressed in the Dhyana mudra, because in the Dhyana mudra, it's a whole, it's a circle which is full, and it's also empty. So it's got both emptiness and fullness in that gesture. That might not make too much sense right now, but I'm hopefully going to draw out a bit more about these two strands of wisdom and compassion. There's also something which I think is quite neat, which is that you've got the symbol of the Vajra, and that's also related to these three things sometimes. It's said that the centre part of the Vajra is, that doesn't look anything like a Vajra, it's a little bit like a Vajra. And it looks a little bit like that, and the bit in the middle is sometimes said to be shunyata, and then either side of these two strands of the Buddha is wisdom and his compassion. And for me, these are the two strands that go to make the Buddha such a unique communicator. His ability to see very, very clearly, the nature of things and who he was talking to, who he was meeting, but also his deep concern for the person, his desire to nurture them, to grow them. So his wisdom and his compassion. So I want to explore these two strands, these two aspects, and to see, how can we cultivate a bit of this? How can we cultivate these in our own life, in our own practice? So the Buddha sees, he saw each person uniquely as they are. He saw their unique gifts, he saw their unique potential, their unique talents. He could also see their unique suffering and their unique conditioning as well, kind of how they brought on their own their own suffering in a way. Their actions and their kind of states of mind were unique to them in a certain way. They're a unique set of conditions, which would create a unique set of suffering. So the Buddha could see very, very clearly who he was meeting. He could see the uniqueness of the people he was meeting. He could see people as they are. The person he encountered, he just saw them as they were. But we're not able to do that. I'm not able to do that. If I encounter somebody, I don't usually see that person. What I see instead is my ideas of that person, who I think they are. What I see is kind of maybe some associations I've got with that person, maybe some fixed ideas about what kind of person they are, the kind of way they behave, the way they usually are, how they usually respond to me, whether I like them or I don't like them, whether they're nice to me or not nice to me. What I kind of tend to see is my own idea of them. So, we call it a projection. I project outwards onto them, and I don't actually really often see very clearly the person that I'm speaking to. I'm getting a bit better at it, but I don't usually, I don't usually see the person I'm speaking to. So this was drawn out to me. I spent the long weekend with my family, and this is usually a situation where fixed ideas come into play quite strongly. We can have quite strong ideas about our siblings and our parents. They can have really strong fixed ideas about the kind of person we are, and it can push lots of buttons. So I spent the weekend with my family. It was my mother's 60th birthday, and so the whole family were there. My brother, my sister, their kids, me and my wife, my parents. We were all there, and what I noticed, well, first of all, actually, was my brother and sister weren't getting on very well, and my brother would complain to me about my sister and kind of how she is and the way she is, and how difficult she was, basically what I noticed is my sister wasn't quite like that. I mean, I'll be honest and say I had quite similar ideas about my sister because I have experienced her as being difficult, but what I noticed is she wasn't behaving exactly like that idea. She wasn't behaving exactly like my brother was complaining. She was actually being quite nice. She was being quite kind of friendly and sociable, and she wasn't behaving in this difficult way. But basically we have, it's very strong. We can see it very strongly in families. We just have a very fixed way of seeing somebody. They can be a problematic person, a difficult person. They can be our friend or something. So we just have this fixed way of seeing people. And often we're not really looking at who's there. We're not looking at the person. We're not really encountering or experiencing the person who's there. And I also had it with my father this weekend, because I've got this idea about my father that he's not a very emotional person. He never really says that he loves us. He's never very kind of emotionally warm towards us. If you try and go to give him a hug, he got quite a stiff, firm handshake or a very awkward kind of hug. But what I noticed at the end of this weekend is he was quite warm and open with me, and he said to my wife and then to me, I really enjoyed your company this weekend, I really enjoyed being around you. And he gave me kind of quite a relaxed hug from my father. It wasn't, it was, we've still got work to go, but it was quite, it was quite a relaxed embrace, a warm embrace. And I think, basically if I hadn't been on the lookout for this, the way that I am fixing people and noticing people, I might not have noticed that my father did that. It might have just slipped by me. And because we can have really strong ideas about who people are, and I've had a really strong idea for a lot of my life that my dad, either doesn't love me or never says that he loves me, or he's never warm. But it's just he's got his own way of expressing it and his own way of saying it. And you can kind of edit out bits of a person. You can edit out bits of your experience of a person because you've got such a strong idea of who they are. And yes, I had a sense of that this weekend with my family. But the Buddha's mind, the mind of the Buddha is empty of those fixed ideas. It's empty of those preconceptions about people. So it's this aspect of emptiness. The Buddha's mind is empty of this fixed way of seeing people. He doesn't see people in that way. He's just open to whoever is in front of him. It's kind of and if you have a glimpse of that or an experience of that, well, people are quite mysterious actually. People are quite amazing, quite wonderful. And it's very, very difficult to actually know a person, to know another person. It's almost impossible to know ourselves, let alone another person. But yet we have the sense that we really do know somebody, and we know them so well that we don't really have to engage with them or to think about them. So this way of operating gets in the way of really connecting with people, communicating with them. we just fix people. But it's possible, it is possible to step out of that, to sometimes be able to step out of that, to notice we've been fixing somebody, to notice that they've surprised us. And just to see somebody, just to look at them, just to be receptive. And in communication, if we're in a conversation with somebody, this is quite difficult to do. And what we need to do is try and be open to the other person in that conversation. And I've borrowed this from somewhere else. You might recognise it. What we need to do is to stop, look, and listen. It's the green cross code of communication. We need to stop, look, and listen. So what we need to stop. Well, we just need to stop rabbiting on at the other person and kind of trying to speak at them, trying to talk at them and tell them what we want to say. We just need to stop doing that. Maybe just stop speaking altogether. We need to kind of stop having this sense that we know who they are and a fixed idea of who they are. What else do we need to stop? Stop trying to get something out of them. Stop trying to get something from the communication, but just basically just to be open with them, just to kind of stop and look at the other person, just to really see the other person, just to experience them, just to kind of look at them, fully, to see their face, to see their expression, just to be open to their what's going on for them, to stop and look at them. And we could try listening. We could try listening to the other person. We could kind of pause speaking and listen to the other person. We could, because often we're just waiting to say what we want to say. We're not really fully listening to the person. We're just waiting to kind of jump in and say what we really want to say. So if we want to try and improve our empathy and our communication, then I think this is something to take on board. To stop, look, and listen. To really fully listen to the person, and to stop rabbiting on at them. So that's one part of it. One strand of it is the. Is there more to say on that? Or maybe it's just to say that it's the mindfulness of breathing. I think that's important to say. The mindfulness of breathing is the way that we can cultivate awareness of another person, particularly, or both mindfulness and metta, but particularly the aspect of awareness of another person, just to really be able to notice if we're projecting onto them, to notice if we're fixing them, we've got particular fixed ideas about them. So it's the mindfulness of breathing, cultivating this quality of awareness, which is crucial in being able to do that. Just to be able to be receptive, just to be with somebody and to kind of hold them in awareness. Another important practice, which I considered trying out this evening, but you'll be pleased to hear we're not going to do this, is communication exercises. So we do, some people who've come across this are laughing because they're if you ever do them, you'll find out for yourself. Basically, we do this thing called communication exercises, where we just sit and do this. Really, we sit quite close to the person, and just look at them, we just take them in, and they take us in, and it's excruciating. We don't want to be seen. We don't want to look at the other person. We don't want them to look at us. It just really illustrates how awkward that must be in communication. Generally, when we're speaking to people, we don't want them to see us. We don't want to look at them. So it's quite a powerful exercise to do, where we sit and look at another person. So if you ever get a chance to do a communication exercises, they're very, very powerful. Just try and just try and do it. So that's this one strand. You could say it's one aspect of this mudra for me. There's lots of ways of interpreting these mudras, and there's more you could say about it. But I'm going to talk about it in this way: that there's this wisdom and compassion. So this is our way into just really becoming aware, becoming wise, becoming aware of what's happening. It is for us, becoming aware of the other person, becoming aware of who it is that we're speaking to. And the second strand is the Buddha's deep concern, the Buddha's compassion, his deep concern for the well-being of other people. So this is the other strand which will help us to be able to really empathise with other people, to really connect with other people, to communicate well with them. His compassion. So as well as being open to the mystery of other people, the complete unknowability of another person, the Buddha also sees their suffering, he sees their unique suffering, their unique qualities, their potential to awaken. And he sees what they need. He's able to tell what they need to ripen, to grow, to develop. So he's got a deep concern for people. He's got a mind which is full of compassion. So we've got the Buddha's mind which is empty, and the Buddha's mind which is full. It's empty of these preconceived ideas and is open to reality, but it's also full of compassion. It's a mind which is full of care, full of concern for other people. So what gets in the way of our deep concern for other people? what is it that gets in the way of our deep concern for the people? What it is, it's our deep concern with ourselves. That's what gets in the way, is we're deeply concerned with ourselves, and there's nothing wrong with that, that's healthy, but you could say we're overly concerned with ourselves, and that gets in the way of us being concerned with other people. It gets in the way of this compassionate response. And this is summed up, this kind of state of being kind of self-obsessed, you could say, kind of overly concerned with ourselves. It's summed up in a Buddhist list, which I've forgotten to write up, but I'll just read out to you. It's a list called the 8 Worldly Winds. And this was a list that the Buddha used to describe, in a way, how our mind just gets blown about by the events in the world because we're so concerned about ourselves. And this list of 8 worldly winds, there's 4 pairs of them. And the first pair is praise and blame. So what we really want is people to praise us. So what we want people to like us. And what we really want to avoid is getting the blame for something. And that will really depend, that will kind of determine our actions and our thoughts. We'll act in maybe sometimes unskillful ways because we want to avoid blame and because we want people to like us. So we're really driven, overly concerned by this. And we want to have, the second pair is status and infamy. It's about where we are in the pecking order. We want to be high up in the pecking order. We want to be kind of famous and have a good reputation. So we'll do whatever we can often. We're driven by this, and we'll experience jealousy of people who are doing better than us. We'll experience anxiety about getting blamed or losing our status. So the third pair is pleasure and pain, and this is one that particularly drives me. I very much like pleasure, and as I'm sure we all do. But I've got a particular, particularly at the moment, ice cream. I really like ice cream, particularly Magnums. And there's one where I seem to be having a lot of Magnums. Well, in a sense, there's nothing wrong with pleasure. Pleasurable experiences are fine, but it's the way we go about them. We expect that if we can get enough pleasure and avoid all painful experiences, that will make us deeply satisfied. And it just doesn't work. We've seen from what we've encountered on the beginner's course, the follow-on course, and hopefully from our own experience, it just doesn't work. We can't organise the world in that way. We can't avoid pain, and we can't hold on to pleasures. It just doesn't work. And the fourth way this manifests is in gain and loss. We want to gain as much stuff as we can, and we're terrified of losing stuff. We're really concerned about losing stuff that we value, we hold dearly. And again, with each of these sets of worldly winds, it causes us to experience anxiety, jealousy, sometimes hatred, sometimes very strong craving and greed, but certainly not concern for the people. These worldly winds don't get in the way. They don't produce compassion and concern for the people. They're very much kind of it's the fruit of a mind that is obsessed with itself and self-interested. And that's what the Buddha said is our case. That's the case of all of us, that this is what causes our suffering. And it's expressed in this list of 8 worldly winds that blow us about from day to day. So you might want to think about, well, does that affect me in my life? Do I relate to these worldly winds? Do I feel like I'm driven by them? Perhaps you're not. That would be great. But certainly for me, for a lot of us, it's as though we are certainly blown around by these winds. They blow our mind about, our mental states about. A lot of the time it can feel very stormy, like our mind is a very stormy place. We're being blown around by these winds, and there's the dark clouds of these emotions, the dark cloud of anger, the dark cloud of the threat of a storm, there's anxiety, the green cloud of envy and jealousy. So our mind is full of these clouds and these winds. And what we need, the antidote to that is the sun of metta. So the Buddha used the analogy of metta as like a sun, a great blazing sun that burns off all the clouds and it burns off all delusion and just leaves us with a pure blue sky, a mind which is like a pure blue sky. So the Buddha used the analogy of the sun as metta, so loving kindness, a warm heart is like a sun that radiates kindness out, radiates kindness and compassion for the people that it encounters. So that's what we need. We need to cultivate metta, the metta bhavana. So the metta bhavana is it's a practice where we're deliberately spending time cultivating concern for others. Just doing the opposite of what our mind might habitually do, which is being concerned with ourselves. We're just spending some time being concerned for the people, just wanting them to be happy, wanting them to be well. So This is basically it's not a kind of very high esoteric teaching. It's the metta bhavana. It's what we taught you on the second week of the third week of the beginner's course. The metta bhavana. This is the antidote to our suffering. It's the antidote to our kind of selfish drives that cause us suffering. It's concern for the people. So we can do this through the metta bhavana, through cultivating concern for the people. But that's not enough. We also need to give expression to this concern, to our metta, through acts of loving kindness, through generosity and kindly speech. So we can get our own taste in a way of the Buddha's compassion, begin to do that through cultivating concern for the people, through metta, and giving expression to that through generosity and kindly speech. And again, it comes into this stop the green cross code. It's just to stop trying to get something out of the other person. A lot of time in communication, when we're in a one-to-one communication with somebody, we've got an agenda, we've got something we want to get out of it, we've got something we want to be talking about, something we want to say to them. So in a sense, we're just part of this concern for the people is to stop doing that, to stop trying to get something out of the conversation. You could experiment with just letting them talk about what they want to talk about. You could even ask them what they want to talk about, what they're interested in, and just let the other person talk about what they're interested in, and to give up having control of the conversation. It's quite a difficult thing to do, but we can see we can watch our drives within our communication. So just to grab a picture of Amitabha, Vidanya, because the other thing we've been tying into these talks is the archetypal figures. So on the intermediate course, people who are new to Sangha Night, you'll have encountered different archetypal figures. And the Buddhist tradition over time, after the Buddha died, the Buddha basically had these many qualities, these kind of multiple many qualities. It was very difficult to kind of encapsulate them in one image that we could meditate on, we could focus on. And over time, in Buddhist tradition emerged different symbols of enlightenment, different symbols of the enlightened mind. And one very important set of these symbols is the mandala of the 5 archetypal Buddhas. And Satyajoti introduced that there's 5 different coloured Buddhas. And they basically represent different aspects of the Buddha, the historical Buddha, different aspects of the enlightened mind. And this is one of those Buddhas, the red Buddha, Amitabha. He's usually associated with metta and meditation. So he's associated with the dhyana mudra, this kind of meditation gesture, the gesture of emptiness and fullness. He's associated with seeing the unique qualities of living beings, their unique potential and their unique conditioning. And he's associated with seeing, with just compassion, with altruism, with metta, with loving kindness, with warmth, with compassion, deep concern for the beings. And so you could say he's the archetype. Well, he's the archetype of empathy. He's the Buddha associated with empathy and compassion and meditation. So that's in a way that's it. We've seen how the Buddha was able to communicate to different people. How he was able to communicate to Bahiya, to Kisagotami, to Sona, Bhadra, I think it was called, the ploughman. So the Buddha was able to communicate in very different ways using language that would emotionally engage people, just help them to awaken. He knew what to say and how to say it and when to say it. And basically, if we can cultivate mindfulness of other people, just a real awareness of other people, if we could stop, look and listen to other people, if we can cultivate a mind which is empty of those preconceptions and fixed ideas about other people, we'll start to see people more clearly. We'll start to see the person that's in front of us, and we've got more chance of communicating well with them. And if we can cultivate a warm heart that's full of metta and concern for other people, then we're getting closer to the mind and the ability of the Buddha. So if we can do that, we're sowing the seeds of wisdom and compassion, these 2 qualities. We're sowing the seeds of those in our own life, and we'll be treading the path of empathy towards awakening. And eventually, hopefully, one day we too will tremble. Our hearts and our minds will tremble with concern and awareness of other beings and their suffering.